Hello everyone, welcome back to our Luna Realty Belize YouTube channel. I am very excited about this session. Many times we get questions about ownership of pre-construction opportunities. Pre-construction opportunities can be a little scary if you don't necessarily know the right questions to ask or perhaps know the developer who is involved. So I want to just get right down to it. I want to dig into the details, and for this session, I invited none other than my ex-boss here, my mentor really in this real estate space, who was so incredible with helping me learn about the industry here in Belize and within Central America. But I've invited Mike Cobb, developer of ECI Development, to help go through some things that you must know. Mike, before we really jump into the nitty-gritty details, why don't you give us a little bit more about your background, your history here in Belize, what brought you here? Give your story a little bit more.
Sure. By the way, it's easy to be a great mentor when you've got a great student.
Oh,
okay?
Thank you, Mike. Very sweet.
Absolutely. No, we're really so proud of you for what you've done here. You've taken what you learned with us and you've really grown it. And so what you're doing here really is really more of an actualization of our vision for the company 32 years ago. I came to Belize for my first trip 32 years ago.
You were what, 5 years old at that point, Mike?
Something like that. No, you were 5 years old.
Right.
Anyway, so 32 years ago. And it's interesting. So I just came through the border between Chetumal and Corozal this last week. And they have to put on the form up there how many times you've been to Belize. And I wrote 300. And the guy looked at it, he goes, 300? I'm like, yep. I've been here pretty much every month for 30 years. Right? I mean, so we've watched Belize as a country grow. We've certainly seen Ambergris Caye grow. And it's been wonderful and exciting. But you know, our fundamental mission going all the way back 32 years ago was, how do we serve a client who has a need that's not being served or not being served very well? And so the first thing we did was start a mortgage company. Because, you know, a bank in the US and Canada would never lend you money if you were buying a property here, and the banks in Belize wouldn't lend money to a foreigner, right? And so we started a mortgage company. We had that company for 10 years, and then we turned it into a bank 20 years ago. Well, 21 years ago now, 21 years ago, we got our banking license, and we're really still a mortgage company. And that's actually something that I know you've helped. You know, when folks come to you and they're looking to get some financing for a property, refer over. But fundamentally, it's always about serving a client. What's a need? How can we serve it? And the reason I said that you've kind of, furthered along sort of our development mission is because, we identified some condo product, really, condo product more than anything else here on the island, that would serve a need to a US Canadian consumer. But we're limited. That's all we do. Right. And so as we find people who want something different than that, we refer to you, and you can help them find what's a good fit for them. But in the end, it's been a great journey, 32 years. And
oh my gosh. It's incredible. And so, Mike, some people may be wondering, do you live here?
I do not. I lived here in 1998 for 6 months, and but lived in Nicaragua. In fact, that's how you came and stayed in our. You were an intern. Rachel was an intern many years ago, and stayed in our home in Nicaragua for what, a couple of years?
Sounds about right.
It's not a couple of years or something, and then came to Belize, and it's interesting to have watched the country grow and really grow with it, and change in some dynamic ways. And I think we'll get into that in a few minutes. But wow, one of my presentations, I talk about the time machine and sort of this path of progress, or I call it the popularity curve, right? And so what we've seen is Belize has gone from this uber niche divers and fishermen, fly fishermen mostly. And so when I first started coming here 32 years ago, like, you would see almost no women. It was groups of men who were going out fishing, going out diving. They stayed in some fishing lodges and some very basic accommodations because they didn't want to spend money on rooms. They wanted to spend money on fly fishing or tanks of air for their diving, right? And then it started, you'd see some women, kind of couples and things like that. And now, you see families, so the market has changed incredibly. And to have watched that happen and then really help each successive group of people find product that's good for them has been, incredibly rewarding.
Right. And, I know for me, one of the biggest reasons that I stayed with ECI, I was with for about 10 years, right?
10
a decade
years,
with the company. And of course, seeing a tremendous amount of growth within the region, but also because of the developers' philosophy of having different products in different countries.
Right.
The development company is based throughout Central America. You have properties in Nicaragua, for example, Costa Rica, right? Panama, different parts of the region where we do see people are gravitating towards. And so I loved that vision, and I loved also just even dialing it in a little bit deeper. Is it's not just the exact same product in every country.
Correct.
It's a variety. You have product from the Best Western all the way up to a high-end Marriott hotel.
Right. Here in Belize.
Right? Yes. And then in the other countries like Nicaragua, obviously you have lots there where somebody can own right by the Pacific on a golf course, and just a variety
condos,
of geographies.
Homes, multi-million-dollar homes on the water on the Pacific, right? And small, very affordable product, a couple hundred yards off the water for under 150. Right. And the other thing that we identified, Rachel, was that the if you're wealthy, the world is your oyster. Whatever. Go anywhere, write a check, you can get some really nice stuff. But if you're middle class and you've got $150,000, $200,000, right, and maybe you don't even have $152,000, but you can put $50,000 down and finance the rest. Like, your options were pretty limited. And so we really targeted that marketplace because it was underserved. I wouldn't say it was not served, but it was definitely underserved.
Right.
And again, finding a place where we could fit and do some really good things in the marketplace.
Yes. And so, you've been working in the region for 30-something years. You don't necessarily live here, but something that I will give you kudos for is that you've built a really incredible team.
Yes.
Right. A really incredible team of people who are able to help that vision come to life and to be able to serve others as they're here in the country. And so I want to talk to you a little bit more, narrow in a little bit more, on somebody who's looking in at working or owning a real estate opportunity that's pre-construction.
Sure.
So based on your experience, because you've also been in that seat before, right? A consumer who's coming in either buying pre-construction or buying, what is some of the best advice that you have for somebody who's coming in and looking at pre-construction opportunities?
Well, such a big question.
It's a huge question.
It's a big question.
We can break it up into 3 different segments if we need to, Mike.
But because the answer is so dependent upon the person, what their goals and objectives are, right? And it's just so many factors. But let me just say that I think the single most important thing a buyer can ever understand about themselves, because buying is really a self-reflection. The more you know about yourself, the better job you'll do in a transaction, right? Are we buying this for lifestyle, or are we buying this for investment? Because those two decision-making processes are fundamentally very different. Like, a lifestyle decision is a heart decision. Do I like it? Do I like the view out the window? Is my favorite bar close by? Do I have a grocery store nearby? Do I like my neighbors? Like, it's all about heart. It's all about feeling and, do I like it, right? For all those other reasons. An investment decision is a head decision, right? If you don't like anchovy pizza, but you own a pizza parlor, I hope you would sell anchovy pizza, because it's not about what we like owning the pizza parlor, it's about what our clients like, right?
Exactly.
And so an investment decision is a head decision. It has nothing to do with what we like. It has to do with a consumer who would come rent my property. Presumably we're talking about rental properties, right? I mean, generally, right? And so who's going to rent my property? What do they want, whether I like it or not? And how am I going to serve that? And so I think the best advice I would ever give anyone looking at a property overseas is decide up front, investment or lifestyle, and make your decision-making process on both. And I would caution strongly, this is my favorite example of this. If you have a hot cup of coffee, and you go to Starbucks and you get a hot cup of coffee, it's delicious. You get a frozen Frappuccino, it's delicious. If you put them both in the middle of the table and let them go to room temperature, they both suck. Okay? They both suck.
Right.
And so if you compromise to the middle, I want to use its lifestyle, but it's going to be an investment, and you kind of get to the middle, you might end up with a lukewarm cup of coffee or an unfrozen Frappuccino, right? And so when we can't always, I get it, sometimes, resources are limited and we get the best of both worlds. But truly, Pick which one is far more important and base your decision on the importance, and you will be a satisfied owner, right? You're so much more satisfied.
Well, and that's a very, very important point, because so many times here, I mean, Belize, Amber Grisky is a wonderful destination. It's beautiful. You have the Caribbean. It's warm, especially in those cold winter months. So it is so common. Mike, it's great. It's great in theory, right?
It's great in theory.
It's great in theory. But I will tell you, the number of times people come down, and while you may think it's an investment, right? You come down here with the intention of it being an investment, you're enthralled by the community. You love driving a golf cart, right? So it's very easy to transition to that mentality of, well, I'll just come down for a month a year, or maybe I'll come down for a few months a year. And that's okay, right? You can do that too, but just come in with that expectation that if you are occupying your rental property during prime rental season, which is high season, I know you folks have heard me say this before, but November through about April, May, and then now June and July are getting busier with all the festivities and the kids out of school. If you're occupying your condo, your property at that point, you will not be making money. I can't say it definitively, right? You may not be making money.
I'm sorry. If you're occupying it, a renter is not.
Right. There you go.
Right?
Well, you have the memories, right? You'll have the memories, so you'll at least be getting something from it.
Right.
But you're not necessarily going to be getting the cash flow that you were perhaps anticipating.
Exactly.
So that is very, very sage advice. And so tell us more, Mike, because you've seen a lot of developers come and go over 32 years.
Well, did I just roll my eyes?
I don't know. They might not have seen it, but you did. You did. So how can what are ways that people can safeguard themselves of knowing that they're working with the right developer in this case?
Oh my gosh. Yeah. It's tragic. Of all the things that break my heart, truly break my heart, it's when somebody comes down and, again, middle class, right? They have one pot of money that's the pot of money they're going to do this with, and they make an investment and they haven't done the due diligence to know that and especially in pre-construction, right? If it's built, it's built, right? But in pre-construction, and it doesn't get built, or it gets built horribly, or just a couple.
So many variations.
So many variations. But just like on one end of the spectrum, a lot of developers use beach sand when they mix their cement. Well, beach sand has salt in it, and when you put salt and rebar together, it looks good for about 3 years. But then the rebar starts to swell and gets big, and it breaks the concrete. And there are buildings up and down the beach. You can see this; it's already happened. But the problem is the consumer doesn't know that for the first 3-4 years until it starts to break apart, right? And the structural integrity of that is minimal.
Questionable.
Questionable. I like that. Questionable, right? So that's kind of one end of the spectrum, right? And that's not the worst case scenario. The worst case scenario is the people who buy a condo or buy a home, whatever it is, on pre-construction, it just simply never gets built, Rachel.
Right.
It just never gets built. And whatever that investment was, it's just gone. And it's heartbreaking. It's heartbreaking. And we, I've been talking about this for, 30 years. I've been doing conferences and presentations for 30 years on topics like this. But due diligence. Asking questions, making sure we know the questions to ask, because we don't know what we don't know, and you've seen that presentation a few times. You might have given it a couple times. You might have given that presentation a couple times. But we don't know what we don't know, and the problem is we can never know what we don't know. But if we have some tools and some resources, some guides that start to give us, we have our 30 questions, right? Or 30 questions. And they're in my book. The 30 questions are in the book, right?
Let's just do a little quick.
Oh yeah. Book plug.
We'll put a link underneath in the description below.
You know what? It's the best dollar anyone will ever invest. If you're thinking about a property overseas, $1 investment and a few.
Is that all it is? It's $1.
99 cents Kindle. I mean, this
U.S. or Belize? Are we talking?
This one's $20. This one's $19.99. No, we're talking U.S. This is the hard copy is $19.99. But for $1, you can get the Kindle copy. I just want it to be available.
Right.
And they don't let. I'd probably give it away, but Amazon makes you charge something, right? So we charge $1, 99 cents, right? I just want them out there. I want people to read the book. And in fact, somebody just reached out to you. You said,
he's like, I've heard about this guy, Mike Cobb. Have you heard of him? Michael, his other Michael Cobb. Have you heard of him before? Is he legitimate? Heard of him? Yeah, I've heard of him.
I don't know. We'll see. But the 30 questions in the book, like the first 4 chapters. Well, the first chapter is about the family, but the next 4 chapters are all about these questions. The whole point about the questions is not to memorize the questions, although they're pretty good questions to think about and ask when you're buying property overseas. the key is, I hope, the goal, and I talk about this in some of the first chapter, is to change how we think. Mm-hmm. These questions should help us change how we think, because you mentioned it in your opening. Like, we are absolutely going from seller beware in the US and Canada, mm-hmm. think lemon laws, think the Canned Spam Act, think Ralph Nader and consumer advocacy groups, mm-hmm. right? So seller beware. Look, if you sell me something and I don't like it, I'm suing you, or I'm sending it back and I'm getting my money back. Chargebacks on credit cards. I mean, it's so easy. The seller needs to beware the consumer is in a bubble of protection. You come to the developing world, Belize, any of these countries, right? Mm-hmm. Those protections are largely not there.
Yes.
They're just not there. And so we do not know how to transact as consumers in a buyer beware environment. We don't. Mm-hmm. And I say we because I'm included. Lots of mistakes that I talk about in this book, they were mistakes I made. I paid the tuition, mm-hmm. And so as I made those mistakes and paid the tuition, I said, you know what, I can write about this, I can speak about this and help other people not to make the same mistakes. Right. But the changing of how we think is the fundamental goal of the 30 questions, but also the book. Change how we think. Operate in a buyer beware environment prudently, safely, but in the end, do it, transact. Nike, just do it, right? Mm-hmm. But with prudence.
Well, and I'm glad that you mentioned that as the just do it mentality, right? Because it's not uncommon when people are hearing buyer beware, right? They'll just do and I think you actually were the one who taught me this phrase, was analysis paralysis.
Oh yeah.
Right? You're just looking at things over and over and over and asking all of these questions. And sometimes the questions that people are asking, we just don't have answers to here in Belize, because it's just maybe not how things are done, or it's just done a little bit differently. And so
the answer just simply doesn't exist.
Well, right, exactly. Right? There is no answer, right? And that's not necessarily a red flag, but it's just understanding that things are different. And so this, I'm going to go back to your questions in a second, but when you start thinking about, like, how does someone overcome, like, there's that fine line, right, between research and analysis paralysis,
Yep.
and what is that driving point that you would recommend to somebody who's like, can't quite get over that line?
Can I don't like to correct you, but I'm going to correct you.
Yeah, go ahead.
I don't think it's a fine line.
Okay.
I think there's a big gap between prudent research and analysis to paralysis. I think they're very far apart. And prudent research is, you come up with your questions, you do your due diligence, you make your site visit, you kind of follow some real basic rules, right? I mean, and the question is like, show me the money. Developer says they're going to build something. Great. Print last month's bank statement. Show me a copy of your financials. Right. So you can do good research over here. The problem is I think it's a very small segment of folks, but they kind of get caught up in this just analysis to paralysis, right?
Yes.
And
sometimes they just don't. They stay.
they stay over there, right? And it's okay, because it's their loss. I can just say, truly, it's their loss. And I can say affirmatively, assuredly, that almost all of the wonderful things in my life have come because I said yes. Because I said yes. And some things are a little more risky than others. And by the way, in here, I wish I knew my chapters. I don't know my chapters, but I got a chapter in here, and it's horrible.
Well, if it's on the Kindle, you can search, right? So you can jump to it.
Yes, it's called the credibility scale, right? So because trust me, if you say you're going to come to Belize and buy a piece of property, you're going to get everything from, oh my God, that's exciting, I always wanted to do that, to, you're going to die. No, you're going to die. And so my credibility scale starts at, like, who do you give no credibility to? The person who doesn't have a passport. If they don't have a passport, like, I take their opinion and I count it as a 0, right? They have a passport, but they've never traveled. Well, we'll give them a 1, right? They have a passport. They've come to Belize, in this example, on a cruise. Nothing wrong with cruising, but they got off for the day, right? Okay, fine. Maybe they get a 2. They have a passport. They've been to Belize and traveled around. That's a 3. They've been to Belize and they've lived in Belize. Credibility score 4. That's the person who says, look, and if they tell you you're going to die, you might want to ask why, because
they might have experienced something.
But they're not going to say that, right? The people who've come here and lived here, same thing with Nicaragua and all these other countries, right? the reality is so different than what the person with no passport, they just, right? They're just not even in their realm of like thinking. So find the people you care about their opinion, and just understand that they're likely to be the people who have visited or have lived. And you get to those people, you're going to get the real story. And I think those are the kinds of things, by the way, that move us from the analysis, maybe backwards, from the paralysis back to, okay, I've talked to some people who have done it, and it's okay. They raised a family here. Or you're raising a family here, right? I raised a family in Nicaragua, right? And so, like, talk to other people like us, right? And see what it's really like. But that'll maybe move people from paralysis back to action. But I actually think that a lot of these folks, they're going to be paralyzed, and I feel sorry for them.
Well, and I do like how you said, you typically don't regret it, right? You're happy with everything that you've said yes to. And I think here in Belize too, what is really important to understand for new buyers is that things take time, right? Things take time. And if you're somebody who wants to pick up a property now and sell it, you're looking for a flip, or you're looking to land bank for a little bit of time, or you want to make a profit on the property that you've owned, I always recommend wait at least 3 years. If you're trying to sell that property or resell that property prior to 3 years, you're going to be breaking even, maybe even losing some money from that. But that's really the stretch of amount of time that I would recommend. So I get it, life happens. Sometimes you have the unexpected and you need to sell. And of course, there's always going to be that factor, but at least 3 years. And of course, depending where in the country, some areas make more sense to hold on to for longer than that. But Mike, let's jump back to your due diligence questions.
Sure.
Because
that was sage advice. I agree with that.
I think I've heard someone say that maybe once or twice. You might have said that at some point over the 10 years. I don't remember. It all blends together at this point. I don't remember what I'm coming up with now and what you've taught me, right?
It's all you, Rachel. It's all you.
But the due diligence questions are you. I will say that. And in the book, you said there are 30 in there. Can you give us a quick highlight, maybe your top 3 that you would recommend for people to ask? I don't want to spoil it all, right? I want folks to be able to enjoy their reading.
Get the book. Now, instead of giving 3 questions, but let me just say that it's hard to remember 30. I can't remember 30 things. Nobody can remember 30 things, right? 3 things. I like 3. 3 principles. So the questions are actually broken up 3 chapters. The first chapter with 10 questions is buy what you see, right? If it's there, it's there. If it's not there and it's pre-construction, that's okay too. But you can see a financial report. You can see a business plan. You can see a team of people. And so one of the questions on that, I'll just go to team for a second, because you mentioned that before. Right. And it's wonderful to build a great team, except when they desert you and leave. But anyway.
I don't know who you're pointing to over there, Mike.
Behind the banner. Anyway, but it's always about team, right? And so one of the things I think that's such a simple thing to do is to, you go to a pre-construction, you're meeting with the developer, and maybe, I love the word, we're gonna, right? Okay, how many people are around the office? Like, if you see 2 people sitting there and they're talking about building a skyscraper, like, you better start scratching your head and going, how are they planning on doing that, right? So team is so important. Business plan, org chart, right? Copies of financials. So if it's, if you can actually go see it, well, then it's there.
Better, right?
It's there, right? But if you can't see it and it's pre-construction, then the buy what you see in the first chapter is really about the plans, the planning. Look, a business plan is just paper, right? It's just a piece of paper, many pages or whatever it is. But the thing I like about a business plan is it absolutely shows that the developer has put down on paper their plan to get from A to B. Correct. It's not a wing and a prayer. Like, look, if you want to throw $350,000 on a wing and a prayer, have at it, right? But you know what? If I'm throwing $350,000 on the table, I want to know that this group of people, hopefully people in their org chart in their offices, have thought about it, figured it out, and come up with a roadmap. And that indicates, a lot higher probability that they will succeed. Money in the bank, it's not a guarantee, but it's a big one, right? Money in the bank's a big one. So buy what you see.
I'm going to jump in for a second there, because you said team, and I do want to reiterate this. When I did ask you, do you live here, right? There was a reason I asked that, is because, Mike, you don't live here, but you've built a very successful organization.
Yes.
Because what I've seen that you've done very well is delegating and hiring the right people, right? Mike Cobb is not going to be there doing the operations, doing the rental management, doing the property management, the janitorial services, but you find the right people to do that.
Yes.
And, you also understand that if you're not here full time, or while you're not here full time, there are people who are and know the ins and outs of everything that they're doing. So if you were trying to come down and be this developer who, was maybe coming in and out at times, or even you were just moving here and you were just coming in with your, with your North American ways, you're going to get a lot of pushback and resistance. And when people tell me, oh, like I did development in the States or in Canada, I'm like, that's fantastic, but this is Belize and things are very, very different here. And you've obviously identified that across all the countries and have the right people in place for that. So I do give you the right kudos for that.
Thank you. And when you build the right team, you really empower them, right? You give them the ability to make decisions, make mistakes, and that's what you really want. I mean, in leaders, you need to develop leaders. Every team needs leaders, right? And in order to develop leaders, you have to give them your trust, right? And they have to trust that you're not going to bang on them if they make mistakes. Look, that's part of learning and growth, right? And that's been challenging. Right, but it's worked, and 30 years of trial and error. But
well, I do remember. I think I was like a month into the internship, and he said, "I remember this always sticks with me: is just make a decision, right? It's whatever is on the table, whatever decision needs to be made. Analyze it. Don't get into analysis paralysis, but just make a decision and do it." And I remember you said, "I'll support you." I think it was like as long as it doesn't bankrupt the company, right, or something along those lines.
Pretty much.
But I think that's an important part. Like
it
you
is.
Just said,
Yeah.
All right, so we have buy what you see. That's segment number one.
Own community.
Number two.
Own community. Because so many projects and developments, really all they ever become are just a series of empty lots, right? And, if that works for you, great. But the reality is most people want community. And think about a lifestyle buyer, right? A lifestyle buyer is coming, they're retiring, for example, or they're moving to Belize. They're leaving their job. Maybe they're a remote worker. But anyway, but now they are. But that didn't used to be. But they're leaving their neighborhood. They're leaving their church. They're leaving their softball group, their Rotary Club, their friends back home. I mean, that whole social element that they had at home, whatever home was, and they come to Belize, like that has to be recreated for quality of life. Community, friendships, those are foundational to quality of life. Sometimes we think about grocery stores and food and restaurants, and that's all important. But if we don't have friends and peers and engagement, social engagement, life is hollow. I mean, it's incredibly hollow. And so own community, what that means is, like, if there's a great deal on a lot out in the middle of nowhere and there's nothing going on around it, well, it might be that way a long time. And if it's close to something, you can get in your golf cart or you can get in your car or whatever and drive somewhere, that's great. But there are literally thousands of miles of coastline of the Central and South America and the Caribbean that have been chopped up into lots and sold, and there's not a house in sight. And there probably never will be, or never's a long time. So own community, look for the kinds of things that foster community. Clubhouses, pools, gymnasiums, a golf course in Nicaragua, right? Doesn't have to be that. But I mean, but restaurants, life, people, you have all that, you're going to have a great community. And again, that's foundational. So own community is number two.
Got it.
Okay.
Very good. And, again, Mike, another great point there, because this is actually, there's a great case study, and I'm not going to name the name of the area, but there's an area here in Ambergris Caye. They subdivided into about 3,500, 4,000 parcels, no HOA, right? Half of the parcels don't even have road access, no utilities. And now the homeowners, right, the property owners are starting to come together and realizing, oh, we don't have parks, we don't have green spaces, we don't have access to this. Let's come together, back form an HOA. And people are like, I mean, they're not calling it an HOA, right? But they're calling it some sort of fund to put together. Yeah. It's great, again, in theory, but now more than half these people bought these lots as an investment property. They don't want to contribute to an HOA, right? Or some sort of community fund. They don't care if there's a park across their street or not. They're land banking. They're going to hold on to. Maybe they'll move down there at some point. So it's very hard to go backwards and do that. So that's
I thought you were going to tell me a success story.
No, that's actually not a success story, but that's something that's important, right? Because if you're going into it looking for that sort of environment, looking for a community, you can't go back and create it. You have to look for a developer who's is working towards developing that.
Absolutely. Right. Is there a homeowners association? Right. Is there a homeowners association? And think about this. I mean, you talk about no covenants and restrictions. Like, if you own the dirt and there's no zoning, you can do whatever you want to with it, right? And my silly example is you build a beautiful home and somebody builds the Hobbit house on one side and a 6-story pink lighthouse on the other, and they turn it into an after-hours disco bar from 11:30 to 6 a.m. every night, right next to your beautiful home, and you can't do that. Why not?
Right.
They own the dirt. There's no zoning. They do whatever they want with their land, right? And so, typically what you find is in planned development, you have the zoning that's designed by a developer and then enforced by the developer. But it's also contractual. You have the contractual covenants that run. But the enforcement's not happening out here somewhere. It's happening on property, either by a very good, strong association or not. And some people don't like that. So, but I want to be free. And there's lots of places you can go be free and build pink lighthouses or hobbit houses or whatever you want, right? Or build your house and just understand that somebody could build either of those right beside you, right? So zoning's really important. And are the fees high enough?
Yes.
That's one of my favorite questions actually on own community.
Oh, we get that a lot. It's too high. These are prices I'd pay in New York or something.
That's right. You know what? No, they're not. Actually, no, they're not. I mean, I know what they charge in Miami and New York for HOA fees, and our fees are, I say ours, but generally ours down here are not even close, right? But the question we have to ask ourselves truly is, are the fees high enough? Because it's easy for a developer who's just selling real estate to, oh yeah, fees are $25 a month. No, they're not. I mean, that's what he might tell you. Remember, buyer beware. He can tell you anything he wants, right? $25 a month. And then when the developer sold all the condos or all the properties, they could fly back to US, Canada, or Germany, wherever they're from. And now all of a sudden, your stuff's not getting taken care of. The building hasn't been painted. The lawn's growing up. There's no security, and just on and on and on, right? And so we as consumers have to kind of pencil out the math and go, does that seem right? And if it does, it's probably okay. And if it doesn't, call it. Like, don't buy it.
Right.
Yeah, don't buy it. Right.
All right. So far we've covered part 1, buy what you see. Part 2, own community.
Yep.
What's part 3?
Know the developer. Know the developer. And if I had to make the analogy of this particular third thing we can remember easily, right? 3 easy things to remember. When we buy a property overseas, if we're just buying a lot somewhere, it doesn't matter, okay. But if we're buying in a condo community or some kind of planned development, we need to know the developer. And we talked about the business plan a few minutes ago. Really, really important, not just for the roadmap, but also for alignment. So for example, if a developer, you read their business plan, ask them for a business plan. They better have one. If they don't have one, you better scratch their head and go, oh, I don't know about this, right? It sounds like a wing and a prayer to me. But read the business plan and ask yourself, here's what they envision for the future. Here's what I want, right? And so then just a silly example. I want a quiet, peaceful place and, whatever. And they're planning, the next Disneyland. You know what? Might not be a good alignment, right? On the other hand, if they say, look, we're going to have low density and, and it's like, oh, this is perfect for me, right? Because what a business plan does is it says what they envision, 5, 10, 20 years into the future. So the alignment of their goal, destination, and yours needs to be good, right? And so business plans tell us that. But when we buy a property from a developer, I like to think it's like a marriage. It's like a marriage, right? Very few of us, like meet somebody today and fly off to Vegas, tonight and get married, tomorrow morning or whatever, right? Most of us, we date, we get engaged, then we get married. And I think the process of buying a property overseas needs to be similar. We need to date a little bit. We need to get engaged, right? And that's when we start to do our due diligence, right? And, date around a little bit, look, date a few girls, see a few projects, whatever, right? Find the one that you like the best. Get engaged. Begin your due diligence process. And then at some point, again, long before paralysis, but, prudently walk through the process, get married. Because all of the things that you hope to depend upon in the States, support of the HOA, problems that come up, all that stuff, like there's no government agency that's going to do any of that. Your relationship is with the developer. And so know the developer and really approach it like a marriage. And I think if we do that, we do a much better job of finding alignment, right? But also finding the relationship that's going to matter long term, right? And I'll say it, I mean, we've disappointed, I said this last night, we've disappointed a lot of people over the last 30 years, right? And we will continue to disappoint people. That's just the reality of life and business, right? But every single person who's ever bought a property from us, even if it was delayed, right? They got their property. They got the keys to their home or their condo or their property, right? They got title to their property.
Right.
And you know what? In the end, that relationship they had with me, not me, our team, our company, right? But they had the trust, and we honored that trust, even though the times were tough. We've lost money delivering homes to people. Contracted it for $150 and it cost $200 to build.
Right.
We delivered it for $150. Those are the kinds of honorings of commitments that are so important. And we only know that when we take our time to date, engage, and then marry. Right? If we just go to Vegas tonight and get married, we might not know what we're getting, next week. Right? So anyway, take your time, know the developer, and just know that the long-term relationship is critically important.
It is. It absolutely is. And especially in an area that may seem foreign or unfamiliar, when you go through that sort of process, it helps to provide clarity as to who it is that you're working with and dealing with. And so I think this has been really, really helpful, Mike.
Good.
Really helpful.
It's been fun, too.
It has been fun. It's nice to get back together.
Nice to see you, yes.
So before we jump off here, why don't you give any last piece of advice? What I'll do is, everyone, I'll put the link to his book in the description below. But Mike, before we hop off, any last pieces of advice for anyone who's looking at Belize, thinking about Belize, or anything along those lines? Absolutely.
Totally non-self-serving statement, because I have my own projects and stuff like that, is if you're coming to Belize to look at real estate, she's your woman.
Thank you, Mike. That was not planned.
I know it wasn't. She's your woman. As I wrote in her dedication to the book,
I didn't even read it yet.
Rachel, so proud of you and all you are as a person, a mom, and a successful businesswoman. Mike. Okay, really, you are an incredible individual, and I'm just so honored that we had our time together professionally. But now we're together. But if you're coming to Belize to look for real estate, you're the one.
Oh, thank you so much.
You're welcome.
Well, appreciate that. Well, thank you everyone so much for tuning in. And as you have any questions, if you want a copy of Mike's books, obviously we'll take a look at Mike's properties as well. But do reach out to us, and we'll see you here in person. Bye, everyone. Bye.